So Norman, thank you very much for joining me. 102 years today since the outbreak of the First World War. Had a huge impact on the region, didn't it?
Well, the whole of the Battle of the First World War did, 1914 right the way through till 1918, and so many villages and towns were totally devastated by what had happened. And there's something like 20,000 people killed, 40,000 injured on the very first day of the Battle of the Somme, for instance. And throughout the whole of the Somme itself, which that particular battle went on through till November, there was around 230, 240 or so people from Birmingham, for instance, that were killed in that. And I think it's right in saying that there was hardly a street in say, Birmingham, for instance, that wasn't affected some way with people going off to war. It must have been a terrible situation.
I mean, like you said, it affected everyone. And 102 years later, is there anything going on at the moment, like today or the weekend, that's commemorating it?
Well, at the moment, the big significant thing coming up throughout there is that in September will be the centenary of the first tanks being involved. A battle called Fleurs, well, F-L-E-R-S, and tanks were made in Lincoln and also in Albury-Wednesbury border, and it's a really significant part of the Black Country played in that. It's not something I know too much about, actually. It's about the tanks, so if anybody does know anything about it, I'd be really pleased if people get in touch with us. But it's all linked in with a company called Metro Camel, which is a Birmingham-based company in Saltley, and they had the factory here in the Black Country as well, and they made 113 tanks to start with, and they proved to be very successful. And I think throughout the whole war, they made over 2,000 tanks.
Wow.
So lots of women were involved with that as well, working in the factories, and also lots of smaller companies were also involved because they were making parts, sort of spark plug type parts, or parts for the guns and the armour, the rivets, and it was big community effort, really, with everybody pulling together for the war effort.
Yeah, and obviously halfway through 1916, the Olympics was cancelled because that was meant to be held in Berlin.
Yeah, I mean, it's strangely enough, the Olympics should have been held in Berlin, and for obvious reasons, of course, that they were cancelled. Now, the 1912 Olympics were held in Stockholm, and there's a nice little quote. Can I just read you this? At the end of the 1916 one, it says that everybody will be prepared for the fruitful events coming up next time. We'll have fruitful labour of peaceful times for 1916. Little did people realise, of course, what was going to happen. Yeah. And obviously, the situation deteriorated. It was in 1915 they actually decided to cancel the games altogether. But work was still going on to build this centre, the sports arena in Berlin, because they obviously didn't think it was going to go on for quite so long. And Birmingham, well, in fact, the whole of the country pulled together to try and raise funds, something like £10,000 to try and send supporters and players and competitors out to Berlin. Wow. So all that fundraising was going on. And Sir Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame and a guy called Bernard Bosanquet, who was a famous cricketer at the time, were leading Britain's efforts to raise funds for that. And they named Bosanquet, might ring a bell. His son was Reginald Bosanquet, became a famous newsreader on ITV, on ITN News. But that's a little aside, of course. But it must have been devastating to have to call off the games, but of course it was inevitable that was going to happen because of the war situation.
And of course, you got at the same time the Somme, the Battle of the Somme, commemorated last month, 100 years since the battle. Also particularly significant in August 1916 because the first film was released of the Somme. I mean, that must really have brought home to people back here what it was like. Yeah,
well, up until then, people have had newspaper pictures and stories that have been sent back by soldiers whose heavily censored reports. And it didn't exactly have it with sort of rose-tinted, but it didn't portray the real seriousness of what was going on, what it was actually like in those muddy trenches. And this film, for the first time ever, actually shocked people and actually brought across to them just how bad things were on the Somme. It was made by a couple of people, one guy called Geoffrey Malins in particular, and we'll have a little bit of a clip of a film in a minute. But the film, it was silent, but I think in a way that probably helped because you had to concentrate on what was happening. You could see all the death and destruction going on. And 20 million people across the country watched that film within 6 weeks of it going out. Wow. So that must have been roughly half of the population.
Yeah.
I mean, considering a huge number of people that are actually away anyway in the trenches fighting.
Well, you mentioned that clip, so we should be able to come and see that clip. Should be seeing with you just now.
Using modern GPS technology and old photographs, Terry was able to find the spot where this famous photograph of the explosion was taken. Geoffrey Malins, who filmed it from half a mile away, later said, "The ground where I stood gave a mighty convulsion. It rocked and swayed. I gripped hold of my tripod to steady myself. Then, for all the world like a gigantic sponge, the earth rose high into the air to the height of hundreds of feet. Higher and higher it rose, and with a horrible grinding roar, the earth settled back upon itself, leaving in its place a mountain of smoke." And this is all that's left of the crater almost 100 years later.
At 7:20 a.m, our mine was fired under the Hawthorne Redoubt. As the debris fell, 2 platoons, 2nd Royal Fusiliers, 4 Vickers Maxims and 4 Stokes mortars left our parapet and moved across in extending order, all under Captain Russell, 2nd Royal Fusiliers. This party came under a crossfire from machine guns before reaching the crater, losing 2 officers and the majority of men carrying Stokes guns ammunition.
And that's part of the new series of Doorstep History. Plenty to look forward to, isn't there?
Indeed, yeah. That was part of our Somme 100 series, which is available on Big Centre and tntnews.co.uk website. New series of Doorstep starts later in the autumn. We're looking for people that have heard about Lewis's department store in Birmingham. If anybody got any ideas, get in touch.
Brilliant. Well, Norman Bartlem, thank you very much for joining me.